So there's some reality and then there's some surreality in this movie.
The more surreal moments too are all. I think they're all kind of drawn from the book. I think it's the imagination of a child. It's the interpretation of a child, and sometimes when you then translate that to the cinematic language, you have to sort of tweak it, you know. And Uzo talked about the sky turning red and the leaves turning to like dripping with blood. And for me, like the most obvious sort of film treatment of something like that would be like infrared. Um, it's an old photochemical process that doesn't really exist anymore. You can't even buy the film stock. Um, but we sort of mimicked it with our digital tricks, and it was for me the most I think closest to what, especially when you're doing drugs and committing such terrible acts of violence, what reality must feel like, where like time and place just blends together without being too hallucinogenic with it, but somehow.
What is it that he puts into the cut?
It's called brown, which is like a very cut down, dirty version of coke, and it has heroin and other drugs sort of mixed in with it. And when they cut it, it can just go right into the bloodstream.
So you do enter the heart of darkness a bit. There's an Apocalypse Now quality, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you think about that movie?
It's really hard not to do a sort of figurehead movie like this and not feel like you're referencing Conrad or Coppola. But it's also it goes to that same thing I was talking about earlier, where it's like as soon as you break away from the normalcies of society and you start creating your own rules, like madness ensues. Like our sanity is somehow based on an attempt at normalcy at all times and sort of reorienting every day. You know, if you think about cabin fever, even if you're just left to your own devices for too long, it's probably not good for your mental health. So I think that same isolation works for groups as well, and it's very easy to turn towards depravity, and the hardest thing is to keep the moral high ground. In the book, Agu oftentimes asks himself if he's a good or bad person. In the movie, I don't make that question as explicit, but by following someone like Commander and me as viewers who like exist in a normal world, obviously his actions feel somehow are deviant, but also feel so dramatically criminal. But if you're just living in that world, the degradation is so slow that you don't notice it happening.
So did you fall into any Coppola-like Apocalypse Now madness making the movie?
I mean, if only we had the time and budget for Apocalypse Now.
Is this a $6 million movie, really? I saw that read somewhere.
Yeah.
That's amazing to me, honestly.
It was really a $4 million movie that cost $6 million logistically, just because that wasn't money that went on screen, that wasn't extra shooting time. In fact, we had time cut just to try to make the budget work. But I forget, there's some great quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it awfully, wherein Apocalypse Now Coppola said that too much time and too much freedom in the jungle is not a good thing. Although Apocalypse Now is an incredible result of that madness. There's no doubt that spending that much time trying to make something like this infuses its own bit of madness.
So how long did you shoot for?
35 days, 7 weeks.
Oh, that's disciplined.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. And what cameras did you use?
We shot on Alexa. Shot on an Alexa camera with old Panavision C-series lenses. Got a really great package. I mean, it was just really beautiful old glass, which to me helped sort of soften the digital feel of it all. This is the first time I've had to shoot digitally. Everything else up to now I've shot in 35, including True Detective.
Wow.
So, had we been able to shoot Super 16, I think we would have. But even the closest lab was days away, so we wouldn't have seen any results of our work until sometimes 2 weeks after the fact, and that's just too much of a risk.
You've done plenty of work with digital masters and fooling around with the digital composite. You've done all of that before.
Like you mean just in terms of the
editing process?
The editing process, yes, but not in origination.
So are you a convert
to digital? I'm a Luddite, and I'll always like old technologies and stubbornly move into the 21st century. If I can shoot 35 on my next project, I will.
And do we know what that is?
Not yet. I don't even know what it is yet. But I don't think I'll ever. We spent so much time trying to emulate film anyway. It's just, you know, for all the, obviously twisting stomach feeling of not knowing quite if you got it in film because it still has to get to the lab before it's tangible. It still just is. Even when there's mistakes, it's the most beautiful mistakes possible.
Kodak is working on something where they're going to load it up to the cloud. Do you know about this?
Well, I know Kodak's just they're sort of like I think they've woken up, in the sense of they haven't accepted defeat of digital and are coming back and bringing film back. And obviously, people like Chris Nolan and Scorsese are really important in terms of keeping film alive and pushing for keeping film to be an option. I think it's extremely important because even anyone who's using digital is still trying to emulate film. It's just cheaper and easier, and it's guaranteed. You know what you're getting as you shoot. But there's also the question of like the immortality. Bazan always talks about the immortality of film, but there's nothing immortal about digital because digital storage constantly has to be updated. Whereas these are archived film reels, as long as they're taken care of, they last for hundreds of years. They'll be there. So, and you can pull it out and look at it. It's not ones and zeros in some impossible, solid state chip that has to be decoded.
So were you operating the camera yourself as well?
Yeah, that wasn't the plan though. I had planned on being my own cinematographer, but I hadn't planned on having to operate. And we had a really great camera operator slash stick camera slash Steadicam operator. And on our first day of shooting, first setup, second take, he pulled his hamstring. And he was able to operate sort of fixed camera positions, but anytime we needed to move the camera, it suddenly became incumbent upon me to hold the camera. So I was operating with an easy rig and doing my best to get some smooth shots, but the handheld look at the film, which I still think adds to it, again, that's its own sort of fortuitous sort of mistake in a way. I think it adds to the chaos, but it wasn't part of the plan. Yeah.
That must have been hard on you.
Physically, it was very draining. Definitely.
I know how hard it is. Yeah. Okay. And then the other question, was there some danger for the actors? I understand Idris almost had an accident.
Yeah, I saw that article. I don't really feel like he would have necessarily fallen off a cliff. We had our stunt guys there and everyone. I don't want it to seem like we had this like will-nil style of shooting where a truck could roll over and everyone get hurt. Safety was still a primary concern, especially when you're dealing with live ammunition and explosives and everything else like that. And obviously, the conditions we were shooting in, the locations, wild animals such as snakes. But we did the best we could to try and make it safe for everyone. And Idris had happened to lean on a sort of dead tree and branch that gave way as soon as he leaned on it. And luckily the AD was there to kind of grab him and kind of fell down one step on a very steep sort of rocky face. But it was dangerous, I think, just like any shoot is dangerous, because of the amount of people, the amount of hours, the fatigue, the speed you're working at. You have to constantly remind yourself that you're just making a movie. You're not doing anything that merits the risk of life, And when you remind yourself about that, then you're able to put into perspective your desire to put everything you can possible on screen with obviously keeping your crew as safe as possible.
You missed the Danny Boyle tribute, but one of the things he talked about was channeling his inner Steve Jobs when he had to do the Olympics. Because the only way to take it away from everyone forcing you to the middle to make it great was to be a total brutal asshole.
Right.
And is there any of that in you?
Well, I definitely look with envy at directors who are able to run their productions over budget by tens of millions of dollars and get everything they're after.
Because, you know why I ask this?
Yeah.
Because your standard is very high.
My personal standard?
Yes. I'm saying that based on the results.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess the standard is also one of those things, too, where it's like, I don't think I've ever been completely satisfied on any movie I've made. I always feel like it had to be compromised in some way just to make it for the amount of time and money that we had. And it's always tough, especially I would say on Beast, where on a daily basis where we're having to compromise so many pages of script or scale of a shot that you feel like you're not quite getting what you set out to do, and that those small defeats can add up over time. But I don't think I would ever get to the place of being a complete asshole. That's not to say that every crew member loves me, but it's still just an art form. You know, we're not saving lives. We're not out there changing the world with a scalpel and a machine gun. You know, we are in the business of telling stories. So
You're changing lives here in the sense of putting a spotlight on something that we need to feel and understand. And I guess one of my concerns is that we Americans tend to avoid this kind of exposure, not to want to put ourselves through it.
yeah.
And I hope we do.
Yeah, I do hope, and I think that's part of the great thing too about, you know, I felt the same way when I made Sin Nombre. I made a short film about immigration, and a terrible incident happened in immigration where a trailer of immigrants were left inside of it was a refrigerator trailer, so it was airtight. They died, and this was in Victoria, Texas. And I thought I was just going to make a short film about it, but when I realized that a feature film would reach a far wider audience, that platform to reach as many eyes and ears and hearts as possible, then you feel the power of it. And I think that's also what sort of was great about the Netflix of it all, was suddenly having access to 65 million homes to tell a story, and having people potentially watch the film, hopefully be gripped and watch it all to the end, that might never otherwise have heard of it. So I think you can reach people in places you normally wouldn't have been able to reach them, with stories that they may not have originally sought out. But I think it'd be presumptuous to think that like you are changing. That would be the hope. But if anything, you're just doing your thing and telling your story.
Okay, but there is a theme here at the festival. There have been Spotlight itself.
Yes, yeah.
And Malala, Suffragette even. I mean, these are all movies that have a mission of a sort.
And that's reflective too, I think, of the kind of people who are making movies these days and the kind of stories they want to tell. And it's wonderful that now that these stories are being addressed and are being spotlighted, I suppose. There's definitely a consciousness in contemporary storytelling, which is pretty exciting.
And the immigration story continues, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the horrific thing about that story I told in Victoria, Texas, it was just repeated in
Exactly.
Austria. That was pretty maddening.
And the picture of the little boy, So you're showing us a boy who you had to find as an actor.
Yeah.
You interviewed 600, but you like found him on a.
I personally did not have you.
You have a casting director.
Thank God. Harrison Nesbit, who did an amazing job on this film. 23 years old, pretty much fresh out of college. He worked with his mom a bit on Life of Pi and got some very good experience. Avi Kaufman.
Right.
And so this was his first sort of like solo gig, and he was out there hitting the road, every school, every orphanage, every football pitch he could get to. Just trying to generate interest and gain the trust of skeptical parents to let their kids come and try out for this film. So he's the one that saw the 600 plus kids, and then we started breaking them down into smaller groups and trying to find the ones that showed promise, charisma for the camera, weren't afraid of the camera, and we created a little sort of acting workshop the last couple of weeks before we started shooting, in which we had about 30 kids who could potentially be a variety of roles in the film, but of that we definitely had to find our agu, and it was pretty stressful because I wasn't sure even in there whether we had him or not.
It reminds me of the search for Kavenjani Wallace.
In what?
For Beasts of the Southern Wild.
Oh, right, yeah.
Where he said he couldn't have made the movie if he didn't find her.
Right. No, I mean, I know those guys pretty well. I worked on their first short film with them. And even on Glory at Sea, the short film, there's a lot of untrained talent. But there's when you find those people, adults or children, who weren't actors and weren't looking to be actors, but and they were always destined to be one of those people in front of the camera. It's a pretty exciting and magical experience.
How can you describe? I mean, I've seen the movie obviously, but Can you describe what the quality is that he has that you needed?
Well, it's two parts really, because there was the qualities I was looking for, which I wasn't sure whether he had, and there was the qualities he already had, in his short life, and
How old was he when you shot?
well, he's 15 now, so he must have been 14 when we shot, 13 or 14, and he was a very serious kid, Abraham, quiet and serious. Um, he'd been hanging out with some older kids. I still say he was cutting school. He says it was a Friday and they had time off. He was hanging out with some older kids, but he was just one of those. He's kind of like a leader amongst his peers, and partially probably because he hangs out with a lot of older people, and is sort of prematurely wise beyond his years. And that was definitely one phase of the character I was looking for. But the two other sort of more challenging ones were what he's like in the beginning of the film, which is younger and more mischievous playful, happier child, to see if I could get that out of him, that carefreeness out of him, rather than the sort of more responsible version of him, which he was in the acting workshops, where he would be telling the other kids to pay attention and helping them with their reading. And I was like, Abraham, don't worry about them. I want you just to be you, think about yourself, and be playful. And we'd give him these exercises or these sort of challenges that we'd do on camera to see if he can be inventive in that way. And the other sort of state of mind or emotions I needed him to be in was the state he's in at the very end of the film when he's talking to Amy, the therapist. And that to me is the real heart of the film, because it's actually, it seems like it's a very straightforward, flatly read sort of approach to a scene, but there's actually much more than that going on there. He has to play somebody whose internal emotions have been completely ripped out of him, and is everything safe and everything he trusts rendered untrustworthy.
And full of shame.
Yeah, shame, but there's also a distance.
Self-loathing.
Absolutely. And probably a reticence. And so all those emotions have to be playing. That's not just the audience projecting it. That's also Abraham doing it. And part of that, when we started shooting, I wasn't sure if we could. We rehearsed it a ton before we started shooting that scene. And I still wasn't sure whether he was going to be able to do it, but we shot the film in chronological order, and that was important to me because we could work on doing the fun stuff at the beginning, keep it light while I still had all the energy, and as the fatigue of production wore on, and the experience of it wore on, and the feeling of it slipping away, when he knew that everyone was going to go home in this time where he was the focus of all these people was going to disappear, I felt all those things would also help add to this final scene that he had to do. And as we were shooting that scene we had 1.5 days to shoot everything at that location. We spent a good half day on it, but he really started delivering it. And once he had all the words, even if you can't understand every word he's saying, you understand the emotions behind it.
Really, you do.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. All right. The Netflix of it all. How important is it for you to be in theaters? I understand you want the Netflix part,
Yeah.
but what about the theaters?
The theatrical for me is extremely important. We had to offer really early before we started shooting to go straight to television with it. And having just done True Detective, which was an amazing project to be part of, I still want to be considered a theatrical director. And what does that really mean? I mean, your own sort of definition of who you are is up to you. But I still enjoy seeing films in cinemas, and I want people to see my projects on the big screen. There's nothing like being at the Herzog Theater here, that sound, and its people in there to experience a story. And I still think it's the best way to watch a film, without a doubt. And so to have my stories take place in that environment, to have people have that experience with these films that I've been working so hard for so many years to make, is still one of the most important parts of what I do, even if it's only for a complete period of time, and then in special occasions maybe the movie's showing on the screen. That the fact that it was shown on the screen is extremely important.
Okay, I know you have to go. But so television is not where you're heading now.
It's not one or the other. I actually have several television projects I want to do. As much as people will watch this film eventually on a laptop or on their iPod or at home. And as much as even the way I execute the films, they're not that different. I still know which films I want to go to screen and in which projects I'm definitely pushing because of the length of time for the television world.
I'm going to go on the record to say you should see this on the big screen.
Please tell people, yeah.